Okay, so we are on some Daled Amid Aleph, and we're probably, let's see, maybe half a dozen lines or less, 4 lines from the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom. So last week we had a very interesting discussion about the question of whether or not we were contrasting the Brisa to our situation where a person had uh, gourds, the vegetables that were in the ground, and the question is it ribis if you make a deal for, let's say, gourds that are a half an amma in size, and then you wind up getting gourds that are an amma in size, meaning you bought the gourds when they were small, but you're getting large, so the part that looks like ribis. So the Gemara says, well, I mean, so one view, of course, is that you bought them and yeshlo, so you have them. Whatever it is, it's yours because you already bought yours, okay? But then we contrasted that with a brisa where we have an interesting brisa where we said that if someone went to milk a goat or to shear a sheep or to get honey from a bee, from a beehive, and there a person's once I said to you, give me a zuz, and whatever I get out of that beehive or whatever I shear or whatever milk is yours. So the chayra there, we said it's not ribis. Why is it not ribis? Because there he didn't say, I'll give you a quart of milk or I'll give you a half a pound of wool, and then he winds up giving him more. He said, whatever I get out of this goat is yours. So we want to make a chilik between whether you specify or whether, in other words, if it's specific and then something changes from specific. If you say yeshlo, okay, but if there's no yeshlo, then if it's specific and you're getting more than what you bargained for, that's ribis. In the case where you don't, if you're not specific and you're very open-ended, and you said, well, whatever the milk is, that's what it is, then it's not ribis. So that's how the Gemara resolves that. But it's an interesting chiddush because on the one hand, when you have something that's in the ground that isn't fully grown, the question is whether or not you're really buying the full-fledged growing gourd so that there's no ribis when you pay, you're paying a half a zuz. You're paying a half a zuz. You're not paying a full zuz. A large gourd would be a full zuz, but you're paying a half a zuz, and it's yeshlo, and you have it, and now you're getting the benefit. So that's the contrast that the Gemara wants to give. And we make that chilik is the final chilik is that with a gourd, it is what it is. Once you contract for it and once you harvest it, there's no more gourd. In other words, it's a one-time affair. But the case of the brisa, once you milk the goat, then the next day you're gonna have to milk the goat again. In other words, the chilik that they want to make is that it's repetitive, that what you're buying isn't a one-time shot like the carry, like the gourd. So therefore, that's how the Ikad Umrah wants to make a chilik. So you can't contrast the brisa with our case because they're different cases. In other words, again, we always like to split a hair, and what we want to say, no, it's not comparable. And in this case, it's not comparable because one is a one-time affair, right? And once you harvest it in that season, there's no more harvest. But with the bees and the sheep and the goat, in that case, once you complete that task, then what, a day, 2 days, whatever it is later, it starts all over again. So that makes enough of a chilik to say that in one case it's not ribis, and in one case it may be ribis. So
All right,
that's the point answer.
could you
Now,
just tilt your screen down just a little bit? We're seeing you from mostly nose up. There you go. Perfect.
better?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now the Gemara says Omar Abaye.
So, Rabbi,
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this and during the week, and the gourd, the assumption has to be that the gourd, nobody's going to buy a gourd when they know it's not going to grow more if you leave it there in the
Right.
ground. You pay for it it's a smaller gourd, but you know it's going to grow. The same thing as if you bought a bush and you know that you know that a bush costs $2 when it's a 1 foot bush, but it's $10 when it's really fully grown, and you buy the small ones. I mean, so when you have things that naturally continue to develop, whether it be size, weight, or whatever, then it opens the question of whether or not the stuff that's coming later opens the door to ribis or not. But it's
Yeah,
not a
but
clear. I'm not hearing a clear answer that says whatever you buy, you buy. Anything that goes beyond that, it's not ribis or it is ribis. So
Well,
what does
Jay,
the
do you
rule
know
come
with
down to?
certainty? Okay, again, I'm not in the vegetable business, but when you buy a gourd, you pay a half a zuz, that gourd is edible and you can use it. But if you don't want to use it, you want a larger gourd, you leave it in the ground. But is there 100% certainty that it will grow? What happens if it doesn't rain? What happens if there's all kinds of different situations where it never reaches what you think is maturity, meaning a big gourd? So that, but you bought a gourd which actually you could use. You don't want to use it because you want it larger. But if it doesn't get larger, would you say that you didn't get what you bargained for? You paid a half a zuz.
No,
And
no,
the
no. You
idea
know
was
what
that the half a zuz would be
you're not
on
going to
the come to
complain.
get a larger gourd. But there's no guarantee.
No, but you're not. But if it typically a gourd will keep growing, then
You said the word
taking a chance.
typically, yes.
So you're taking a chance. But
You're
when it
taking a
does
chance,
grow double,
right?
that shouldn't be ribis because you took a chance.
Right, right.
And the seller also knows that it may grow a chance. So I don't know. So what's the straight rule when things can mature more after you buy something? And that's what
Okay, but there we rely on the fact that there's yeshlo. In other words, you bought it and you paid for it now. So it's yours now.
yeah.
Whatever happens will happen on your watch, not on the farmer's watch. If it's on your watch, then yeshlo is an exception to ribis. It's not ribis because it's my gourd that's growing, and I'm taking the chance that the gourd will be bigger. So you can't say it's ribis. According to that view, you can't. Now, if it wasn't yeshlo, then it would be a different situation, because if it wasn't yeshlo, then you would say that it's the farmer's gourd and that you're getting ribis because you paid for something and then you're
Half
getting more
price.
back. And that's the problem with ribis, is that it's so subtle as to whether or not you're getting a benefit or not. So therefore, every situation that we learn has different qualities and characteristics that are miyuchad just to that case. And we'll see here, and what we're about to learn now as well, is that it opens up another door to ribis. But ribis is such that it's kind of all around you, 360 degrees. And the Gemara, I mean, the Chazal did carve out exceptions to make it. Otherwise, it would be impossible to do any transaction if you didn't have certainty, like a yeshlo, right, or yotza hashar, if the price was set. In other words, these are exceptions to the rule to make it a little bit easier for people to transact. But if they didn't have these rules, these exceptions, then every potential case is ribis. Like you say, every case is potentially ribis. So it'd be very hard to get around it. So I think in this particular case, it's not ribis, and economy you have yeshlo, but there's also the when we used the term last week, curve lahefsid kamola socher, that it's as much a profit as it is a loss. When you're buying something and you're saying, okay, it's going to grow and I'm going to get twice the size of the gourd, and I challenge and I say to you, okay, that's your expectation. But what happens if the season, if it somehow changes that it doesn't grow for whatever reason? Then the question is, what did you buy? Well, I got what I paid for. I paid a half a zuz for a small gourd. I thought I was getting a bigger one, but I wound up not getting a bigger one for whatever reason. Then, okay, fine, but at least I got what I got. So that certainty, you don't have that certainty. In other words, we're going to see cases where there's an absolute certainty. There's no question. In this particular case, there's no certainty, as there is not a certainty when I sell you for a zuz all the milk this goat will deliver. I didn't promise you a quart or a specific amount, and you were willing to take the risk that there would be more than, let's say, less, that there would be more milk than you anticipated and you get a benefit. But that's not ribis, because there was a risk involved. And again, we'll see, risk is one of those things that takes it out of ribis, because then you have a whole different question of Yetzer Hefsid, of whether or not there's a bigger loss than there is a gain. But again, we'll get to that in a little bit. But in any event, that was the chilik the Gemara wanted to make, is that by the case of the gourd, well, first of all, there's yeshlo, but also again, we say that since the other chap here is that the gourd was here, it existed, it was already in front of us. So if it's in front of us, he knows he's buying a Metzias. It isn't like I lend you $100 and you have to pay me back, meaning the money's not here, it's not in front of us, right? You have to pay me back, and when you pay me back, and you pay me back with more than $100, okay, that's ribis. But in the case where you're buying an object that is here in front of you, except that object has to grow naturally, then we're not going to argue that if it grows naturally, aside from the argument of yeshlo, but if it grows naturally, then you have no control over that. It's not something that you bargained for and said, I'm only paying you half a zuz if you're going to give me back a larger gourd. That's not the case. You just assumed that you would get a larger gourd. That's why you bought it. So in that particular case, there is no ribis, because again, for a variety of reasons. But again, we're saying that there's no ribis that because they are here, and since once you harvest it, there will not be another. Therefore, this is sort of a self-contained situation, and therefore it's not ribis. Okay, so again, the Gemara went back and forth. There were some other subtleties to it. So now let's take a look here. Now we have a slightly, as they say, there's so many variations. We have a slightly different variation to ribis. Omar Abaya. So comes Abaya. He's stating halacha. He's saying that it's permitted for one person to say to another, "Helech arba zuz." I'm going to give you 4 zuz, and what? A chavisa de chamra. And I'm going to give you 4 zuz for the barrel of wine that you have in your store, but I don't want it now, I want it later. Okay, fair transaction, no bargains, nothing. 4 zuz for a barrel of wine. Okay, now what happens? Itak for b'shusa, but this is the fellow's, he's giving him the details of the transaction, and he says to him, here's 4 zuz. However, itak for b'shusa, if the barrel turns sour, meaning the wine becomes vinegar or whatever it is, and it's no longer the wine that I expect to buy, then b'shusa, then it's yours, not mine. In other words, there's no deal. I'm giving you the 4 zuz, but only al manas that you deliver the wine to me and not something else. Okay. However, izakra izila v'shusi, but, and this is him speaking out. He's saying, but if it rises in price or lowers in price, meaning that I'm buying a fair amount for 4 zuz, but what happens if by the time I buy it, that wine is worth 5 zuz or 3 zuz? Then it belongs to me. In other words, I'm going to take the risk of up or down, but I'm not going to take the risk of that the entire thing should be spoiled. Okay, so this is Abaya's halacha. This is what Abaya says, that he may do that. He may speak out and say, I'm only buying it if it's intact and not spoiled. but I'm also, and then you have it, but it belongs to me if it either appreciates or depreciates in price. Okay, so again, we don't know about Yesh Lo, we don't know anything about you. This is just the case, and Abaya comes and he says that that's appropriate. Okay, do we have any questions on that? No, I mean, at this point, we're saying that that's the deal they made, and it looks like a fair deal. Now, Omalei Rav Sharva Abaya. So Rav Sharva says to Abaya, and he's going to challenge Abaya. What is he going to challenge Abaya? And he says, "Okoro l'socha v'rochav l'hefsidi." How can you say that that's a valid sale? It's an unbalanced sale. Why? Because the fellow who's buying it is totally taking the risk, or substantially taking the risk out of the purchase by making a condition that says if it turns sour, he's not going to buy it, right? So there's a greater likelihood that he will make a profit, that he'll make money on it because it may appreciate in price, then it will become sour. In other words, statistically, I guess, there's a greater likelihood of one and not the other. So this is a different case of ribis than what we're used to. So, in other words, he's saying,
side is the ribis.
Okay, why is it ribis? Good question. So, so inherent in the challenge of Rav Sharva says, Abaya, the case that you posed isn't really a case of a sale. In other words, Rav Sharva is interpreting the case as a case of I'm lending you 4 zuz. I'm lending you 4 zuz. If the goods are bad, then nothing. But if I make a profit or a loss, then I'll take it. So we see that what is he doing? He is creating a situation where that loan that he made may profit him if it appreciates in price. So if it appreciates in price,
that's true.
And that's ribis. So Rav Sharva,
but on the other side, if he loses,
your case, the way you pronounce it, is not a sale. It's a loan of money.
It is
which
a
will
sale.
turn into a sale later on.
Why would they agree to it if it depreciates that it's still? Because you said that whether it goes up or it goes down,
They'll keep it.
Rabbi,
if it goes down, it doesn't make sense for them to even agree to something like that.
Rabbi, this is a distinction between a loan and a contingent sale. This is a contingent sale.
Mike,
It is a
closer to
sale.
the
It
mic.
is not a loan. And the conditions, the seller can and the purchaser can agree to the preconditions or not agree. Because if I understand the case correctly, if it turns to vinegar, he's not buying it. If it depreciates in quality or in amount, then he's still buying it because there is a risk that the quality of the wine at the time he buys it will not be the same quality as it was. It could be better because it aged more. It could be worse. So there's a risk for both in that. The only risk he's trying to guard against is that it is turning to vinegar where it is totally different and not usable as wine. The other part of the contingency about up or down is part of a business deal. You buy something at a certain point in time, and you say, I'm buying this at this price. You're buying it because you're taking the risk at that point in time. It may go up, it may go down. The seller's doing the same thing. And so that's the risk you're taking. As long as it doesn't turn into vinegar, if this is as strict as it is, then it is a contingent sale. With that, the only condition that would invalidate the sale. That is not a loan in any way, shape, or form. It is a sale, and he owns that as long as it doesn't turn to vinegar. because he can't control what the seller does with the barrel in his possession. He may put it in the sun for all we know. So I don't understand how the concept of loan ever enters into this discussion.
So you're right, Michael, but what you're calling a contingent loan, a
Not loan, a
contingent
sale.
sale. So what you're calling a contingent sale, Rav Sharvia calls a loan.
But it
He is
can't.
calling it a
What are
loan.
the elements of the loan that make it a loan? You're not borrowing that. You're saying if this is good stuff when I buy it, regardless of whether there's shrinkage or not, as long as it doesn't turn to full vinegar, then I'm buying it when at the appropriate time. It's your job to guard against that. That's the only contingency in. But we have a sale as of a certain date, as long as spoilage isn't so much that it turns to vinegar. That's not alone in anybody's mindset. There's no way you can try to twist it to make it a loan.
So I hear what you're saying. You're making a very strong argument. And in our language, you're right. This is a contingent sale based on whatever the outcome is of that barrel. Rav Sharvia is, again, it's a half a minute. He's asking the question and saying that the reason why this is problematic is because this is a case where the likelihood of having a profit as opposed to a loss is greater. It's greater likelihood that it will be a profit.
That's an
rather than a
assumption
loss.
that is a bad assumption, because anything could happen to that.
Right.
It could be the wine could not be the same quality and deteriorate, but not become vinegar. He would then be overpaying for it, but he's taking that risk for a contingent deal in the future when he's taking it. So how do you construe that he's lending the wine to him? It just doesn't make any sense that
No.
Lending the money.
Okay,
but in
by
exchange
giving
for a
him
loan of the money, he's taking wine, which means he's borrowing the wine. So he's not buying it, he's borrowing it. But he doesn't have control of it. It still remains in the possession of the seller. It's nonsensical to say that it's a loan.
Okay, so let's break it down. Rav Sharvia is of the mind that if I give you money today for Zuz, and you don't give me anything at all right, you're using the term contingent sale. I understand that. I don't disagree with you. Rav Sharvia is saying, but this it could look like I gave you 4 Zuz today, and you're not giving me anything. Now, what do the return look like? Either it will turn bad and I'll have to give you back the 4 Zuz, or it will appreciate in price and we have a deal, or it won't appreciate in price and we have a deal. So when you break down the elements, says Rav Sharvia, what's more likely? Is it more likely that the purchaser here, the one who gave the 4 Zuz, is going to make a profit or take a loss? He says, or Sharvia says, that the likelihood is, I mean, how often does a wine turn sour? Maybe not often, but it happens. So Rav Sharvia says, if you give someone 4 Zuz and you're going to get back possibly more, because the wine will not turn sour, and you'll have, let's say, some kind of a windfall because you gave the money in advance, or there is actually an appreciation in the value of the wine. So those conditions outweigh the possibility that it'll be a negative, and therefore, says Rav Sharvia, that looks like ribbis, because I'm getting back more. It wasn't an outright sale. You're right, call it a contingent sale, he calls it a loan, but it wasn't outright. And if it isn't outright, and the borrower, the lender is going to wind up with something more than he actually, there's no yesh lo here, right? It's in the possession of the seller, so there's no yesh lo. So everything is sort of stacked in a way against the lender, or the one who gives the money, because he's saying, okay, here's 4 zuz, and I'm relying on the fact that this and this will happen. So we're saying if it happens, then he has the benefit, and l'chayra it looks like ribbis. Rav Sharvia, I know we're talking about a contingent sale. I know that's the term we're using. Rav Sharvia doesn't want to use that term because he's saying that the fact that I gave you the money and that that the wine, which is not in my possession, could possibly void a sale if it becomes spoiled. He interprets that as a loan. That's what Sharvia's view. He interprets it as a loan, or it can be seen as a loan by someone saying, "Oh, moving game Shivin 4 zuz." He lent him. You don't see a certain transaction. In other words, we're in a store, and you come into the store, and Jay is the owner of the store, and I come in and I say, "Jay, here's 4 zuz, and see that barrel? I'm going to take that barrel 6 months from now." So someone looks at this and says, "Oh, wait a minute. So you have the money. He doesn't have the barrel, and he's saying that I'm only going to take it if it's not sour." So I'm a bystander. You're a bystander. And you say, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" He's going to have the use of the money for 6 months and not have to give anything up. That looks like a loan to me. Yes, you can argue it's a contingent sale. I'm not saying it.
Rabbi,
you
I
can
want to
argue
go
that.
back to the case of
But
the
to an
gourd.
observer, you can see where he might think that I'm lending you 4 zuz, and later on we may have a transaction, we may not.
Rabbi, I want to go back to the gourd case. If you make the deal that I'm going to purchase the gourd if it's at least half a pound. Let's equate the two. If it's at least half a pound, and I'm willing to pay this price, but if it doesn't get to half a pound, then I'm not going to make that sale. I've still got a contingent sale. The gourd hasn't come up yet. It's the stalks are starting to grow. It hasn't come up yet. So I don't know. So I want to protect myself against the bottom. It's the same case, but there are so many other risks involved. If you go back to the wine, if the quality of those grapes in that season were not, and let's say he made this for a year, this deal, and were not that great, and the quality of grapes in the next season were better, this is going to go down. How can you say that it's rigged in his favor? The same thing with the gourd. I mean, you have made a sale for a certain time. That would say that anything that could happen in the future, because you might benefit, because prices might change the other way, is ribis. It's maniacal to think that, you want a condition that says, I don't want to buy vinegar. I want to buy wine. I don't want it such that it has spoiled. And that's in your hands. You're handling it. You're storing it. You're preserving it. If it's wine, I'll take it. If it's vinegar, it's not worth the same. That's a condition. How is that Morrisayan? I don't get it.
Okay, so I hear your question. Let's just look back on what the Gemara just said and introduce a concept that may help understanding. What's Rav Sharvia's have a meaning that it's a problem, that Abaye is a problem? So, in other words, the reason why it is ribis, why it appears to be not what you think it is, and it's ribis, is because there's a greater likelihood, there's a greater likelihood that this fellow will make a profit, he'll benefit from it, than it is that he will have a loss. So what does that mean? It means that in the normal course of events, right? Let's say the market for wine appreciates. Okay, it could very well appreciate. So that would be a benefit to the lender. He's saying that likelihood that it will increase is greater than the likelihood that the wine will turn sour. In other words, just on statistics, Rav Shavi is saying wines don't turn sour very often. They don't. Okay, but he made a deal that if it does turn sour, that he will get his money back. But the fact that the wine might appreciate over 6 months, in all likelihood, where they were living, that would be a greater likelihood. Again, we're trying to transpose ourselves that wine appreciates in value. I'm getting a deal because I'm buying wine at a lower value today, and I'm going to get it in 6 months. So this is the problem. The problem is because conceptually, he's more likely to make a gain than to suffer a loss. And Rav Sharia says that in a case where a person will make a gain, there's a greater likelihood of a gain than a loss. I consider that ribbis. Again, you call it a contingent sale, he calls it a loan, but the bottom line is that the profit that he'll get from it is greater than the loss, and since there's no yeshlo, because it's all in the rishus of the owner, not in the rishus of the purchaser, therefore everything is up for grabs. If it was in my rishus and it went up, that's fine. But you're holding it, it's in your rishus. We don't consider it as if you already bought it because you made a contingency correctly that it's not yours if it becomes sour. So that means it's not yeshlo, it can't be yeshlo. Therefore, says Rav Shavia, in my view, this would look like ribbis because when it appreciates, you're getting back something more than you bargained for. And remember, we're talking about a sort of contract, the whole Gemara for the last couple of days. We're talking about purchases that you made in advance, right? You put down money in advance in all these circumstances, and you're going to get something greater than what you bargained for, whether it's wine or a gourd or whatever it happens to be. And without the yeshlo exception, that should be ribbis. So Rav Shavia says, how can a buyer say, and he makes a halacha here, that this is okay if he makes these kinds of arrangements with the seller when he's opening the door to the possibility that it will be ribbis. Now he calls it a loan, you call it a contingent sale. Again, I'm only thinking
that's a big difference. That's a big difference.
That's what he holds. He holds that it's not a sale, but rather a loan. You want to call it contingent, but let's just say neither way, the underlying motive here is yotza schar yoser mehefsid, that the schar, the potential profit, is greater than the hefsid, and in that kind of circumstances, Rav Shavia, that's considered ribbis. When it's not a balanced situation, I have no exceptions of yeshlo, then I'm getting a greater benefit from my purchase, and that should be considered ribbis.
Rabbi, let me ask you a question.
I don't want to dwell on the contingency sale versus the thing. I just want to make the point that the underlying reason why he says it's ribbis is because of the schar is greater, potential schar is greater than the loss.
And let's in Michael's case, suppose we call it a deposit. He doesn't pay the full, and it's just a deposit on this whole story.
Yeah.
What changes there?
But see, it is a sale unless one criterion occurs. And I want to point out, Rabbi, if this is for 6 months later and this person is a wine merchant or sophisticated in the sales of wine, do you not think they're going to price it of what it would be 6 months later when it's aged? So it's not necessarily, if you bought the wine now, aged as it is, but it would be sold based on the fact that what the price would be 6 months from now.
The
So
seller
it would be
needs
built into the sale contract.
the
And this
seller
is a
needs
sale contract.
the seller needs some cash now, so he agrees for this kind of a deal. I mean, there's other kinds of ways that this could happen, just the way it says. But I'm curious if it was only a deposit, the same story, the same case, but he gave a deposit, not the full amount.
I don't think, Jay, that would make a difference because it's a sale. If you put this, if the question to me is, and we talked about this 2 months ago or more, that we could have sales for the future in that the rabbis didn't want to destroy commerce. They had the provision for sales in the future. The
Right.
only thing that this buyer is trying to protect himself against is, I don't want to pay for a product that's not the product I'm buying. And because I don't have the product, I can't ensure that you're going to store it the right way and preserve it the right way. So I want to guard against it being vinegar because then it's not worth it. That's the only restriction in there. And as far as pricing, and it's a sale in every way. There's only one limitation. I'm saying, so if you don't take care of it properly and it turns to vinegar, I'm not buying it. But as long as you do that, I'm buying it. That's a sale with one proviso.
Right. So you're right. But now listen, here's what's going on. The fact that the fellow is giving him the 4 zuz with a contingency, okay, if it turns to be sour, there's no deal. But because he made that contingency, if it goes up in price and he gets a profit, Rav Shavis says that's ribis. In other words, I'm not going to argue he calls it a loan, you call it a contingent sale. Let's not focus on that. Let's just say that we're introducing a new case where a person is buying something in advance with a contingency that maybe the deal won't be a deal. We haven't had that before in any of our examples, and that's something novel. Now, if that's the full deal, then we're going to say, okay, maybe that's okay. But the other half of the deal, what did he say to the guy? He said to the owner, however, iyokra, if it goes up in price, then it's mine. There, Rav Shavis says, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that I'll make a contingent deal and that's okay with la halacha, but at the same time, you want to reap the if that was the end of the transaction, Michael, I agree.
But
with
if
you
it goes
100%.
down in
No
price,
reason.
it's still mine, he said. And so he's got both sides covered. And again, Rav Shafra is trying to say that he's paying a price that is not considering the 6 months out. And if he's paying the price 6 months out, the likelihood of him making a profit over that amount, because obviously they had statistics there. They had computers that kept statistics on what the historical price of wine was going out 6 months. So he factored that into setting the price, the appreciation of that. And so the likelihood of it being higher than that is not likely, because they've put it into the deal. So it's sold. There's only one reason it would not be a sale. It is a sale. That's why I don't understand. So is the rabbi's concept that if there's a condition of sale, that the sale doesn't occur until the actual goods change hand? But I thought we could make deals to take things down the road. So if I agree to buy 100 bushels of wheat and on the threshing floor, and you earmark that wheat, you own it. So the same thing with the barrel, you own it. What he's saying is, but I can't control the storage. He could say the same thing with the wheat. If he undid the deal because the wheat had gone bad because you didn't preserve it, what's wrong with going back to the seller and say, hey, you didn't do your part of the bargain? Because the deal was that I would buy the goods as they are.
So, but the only difference between this and every other case before is because it was a two-sided transaction. I will make a deal with you and I'll take the risk of up or downside, but I won't take the risk of it turning bad. This is a Chiddush case. This is not a case that we've had before. So Abaya says that's okay. Comes Rav Shavia and he says, I don't like the looks of this case because in this particular case, if it's an up or down, okay, he takes responsibility, whether it increases or decreases. But the up and down has a caveat. The caveat is if it's completely bad, I don't take it. So says Rav Shavia, that introduces a concept which I don't hold of. And if we read Rashi, let's read Rashi to reinforce what we're talking about and see the Rashi first. Okay, the Rashi. Okay, at the bottom here, Avose de Chamre, Sheyesh Biyadecha, the wine that you have, in Takva, in Machmetzes, all right? So we're going to say if it goes bad, then look at the Rashi on the top of Samach Dal and Amid Beis, Korov L'Sachar, Im Yikra, if it goes up, Rochot lehefsid. That's this new concept. Korov l'sachar. It says Rashi on the Gemara that there's a greater likelihood of sachar in mikra if it goes up, rochot lehefsid, but less of a likelihood of loss. Why? In takva, if it goes bad, lo makabel aleh. He won't even take it. The Tanya, the Pirkin, and we see later on in our Gemara, this concept of greater likelihood of gain than there is the likelihood of loss is Russia. Why? The shakel ribis, because that's considered ribis. Why? The kiven the ena makabel achrayis amekach, since he's not taking upon himself the responsibility of the sale, because he has this loophole of whether it goes bad. Nimtza she'ein zeh mecher, says Rashi, that this is, I know, you say something different, Michael, but Rashi is saying, Nimtza she'ein zeh mecher, this is not a sale. Umos halo v'hein etzlo, and the money that he put down to the seller, right, he put it down, and therefore, when it does appreciate in price, it's ribis. So again, I understand your point. You're saying it's a contingent sale, and a contingent sale should be okay. But we're introducing a concept, which the Gemara will later talk about, which is karav l'schar rochas lehefsid. That in a case where there's a greater likelihood that you will have schar, then you will have loss, but you have this loophole of being able to walk away if it's bad. Then when it does appreciate in price and there's no yeshlo, that looks like ribis. So again, we're going to go around. The point is that what we're introducing here is a new concept that triggers ribis, says Rav Shavia. In a normal case, I wouldn't say it's ribis. But because if I come to you and I say, I'm buying this wine, but I'm conditioned that when I pick it up in 6 months, it's not sour, that is a contingent sale, and that's okay. That's a contingent sale, 100% it's okay. What makes this different, Michael, is that after saying that, he makes another statement. The second statement is, but if it goes up in price or down in price, I'm buying it. So the Gemara is trying, and Rashi is trying to explain that taking the two coupled together, the first part which is okay, and the second part which is okay, and putting them both together in one transaction makes it not okay.
But
That's
Rabbi,
what really the Gemara Rav Shari is trying
the
to say,
second
is
statement is
that this is a
implicit.
hybrid.
The second statement is implicit. If you took out the second statement, it would mean the same thing. As long as it didn't turn to vinegar, I'm buying it. So the second statement, I'll take it if it goes lower, I'll take it goes higher, I'll take it if it's the same, is irrelevant because I'm taking it unless it turns to vinegar. The second statement is meaningless. And I want to go back, forget before this case, when we were talking about 100 bushels of wheat, if that wheat went bad, I agree to buy from you 100 bushels of wheat.
And no contingency
no
for
contingency.
equipment.
And if the wheat went bad, as the seller,
I take the loss. The buyer takes the loss.
So he's saying that even if under the seller stores it, and because of his carelessness, the quality evaporates.
Not carelessness. He left the barrel sitting in the cellar, and it turned bad. He didn't do anything. He wasn't culpable for it going bad. It went bad because once in a while wine goes bad.
Okay, so then what we're saying is you can't put a condition on a sale because the second statement is irrelevant because he said, regardless of whether it goes up or down, I'll buy it. You can read into it, well, you may make on it, but you also may lose on it. The real issue is that the rabbis would not allow a contingency for it going bad because then it shifts the risk, because that's part of the purchase, is that it will go bad. So that's really the essence of what matters here. They're saying you cannot put a condition on a sale. You either buy it or don't buy it, and you can't put in your contract the condition. Even if you charge a premium for that, you can't put that condition. That's what this is. The essence of this is,
Yeah, right. So when you're taking a transaction which would normally be okay, I take the risk of up and down, and I introduce a different concept together that I'll buy it if it's up and down, but I won't buy it if it turns sour, which we have never had before, where the parties speak that out with clarity. I will not buy it if it turns sour, but I'll buy it if it goes up or down. Says Rav Sharvia, that triggers the concept of Korov l'socha v'rochav lehefsid, which later on the Gemara will explain why that is a problem. Since this transaction, the way it goes down, triggers that concept of Korov l'socha v'rochav lehefsid, therefore, says Rav Sharvia, Abaye can't be right. Abaye's statement can't have validity when you have a circumstance that you take a case that would normally be okay and you append a concept that excludes him from any liability. That, says Rav Sharvia, that's ribis.
So my last question, Rabbi, if you took the last statement out, the high, it goes up or down, would it be acceptable?
Yes.
That makes no sense to me. Because
and there's no yeshlo. There's no yeshlo. He doesn't have the exception of yeshlo because it's in the possession of the seller. Therefore, I mean, he's simply saying, I'm paying you, I'm taking a chance. It's like buying the price which I quoted last week. I'm going to a goat herder, and I'm going to buy milk from the goat with the zuz, regardless of the amount. I don't know how I may get nothing out of that transaction. If the goat doesn't deliver, I'm still giving you a zuz. So, and the Brisa says that's okay. So if I'm going to say, you know what, I'm buying this wine, regardless of whether it goes up or down, I'm just buying the wine. I'm letting you hold it. Says the Gemara. Says Rav Shavi. That's okay. You can do that. I
misunderstood what you said, I think. So just clarify for me. So the provision he doesn't like is if it turns to vinegar. He does not that if it goes up or down, because if it goes up or down, it's just reiterating I own it unless it goes to vinegar.
Right.
So his problem is with, if it goes to vinegar, you're taking away part of the risk on the downside,
That's
and
correct.
therefore I misunderstood that. Okay.
Right.
So a contingent sale with which is obviously based on a condition is not permissible under halacha.
Right. And again, and I'm not going to belabor it, but the postscript is what you're calling a contingent sale, Rav Shari is calling a loan. I don't want to.
I understand that, but I vehemently
Yeah, I
disagree with it.
understand why you say it's a contingent sale, and by all accounts, it looks like a contingent sale. But he's saying because you couple these two statements together, you've thrown it into a different pot.
So the essence is you're handicapping it in the favor of the seller if you put a condition on that he's not going to take it. If it's a straight buy sell transaction without any conditions on it, then it's fine.
Yeah. So we're saying because of these conditions, when he
Only the
actually
first condition, the second condition doesn't add anything. He's just
Okay.
saying that whatever happens, I'm buying it unless it turns to vinegar. So the unless it turns to vinegar is the key essence.
Yeah. Okay. So
Thank
that's Rav Shavia's taina on Abaya. It's okay. So here we spent the last 45 minutes.
Sorry, but I just had a clarify.
So now there's an answer to that question. Abaya is going to answer him, and I'm not sure you're going to like the answer. But Abaya says, no, Rav Shavia, you have no taina on what I said. Why? Omer Abaya, kivil the mekabel oleho zolo. Since the buyer accepted on himself the possibility that the value of this wine will go down, korav lezeh v'lezehu, then it takes it out of this concept of korav l'schar v'rochak lahefsid. In other words, the scale isn't here and here. If you can see my hands, it becomes here and here, even because not only does the buyer able to wiggle out if it's bad, but he takes upon himself a loss if the value of the wine goes down. So there is more than just an imbalance of benefit to one and less likelihood of a loss to the other. It now evens out because he's also taking a risk on forget about whether it goes sour. It doesn't go sour, but it's a possibility that he's going to pay 4 zuz for wine that's worth only 2 because it went down in value. That says Abaya therefore Rav Shavia, you can't challenge me on my case because my case is really the normal case of balanced loss. So the answer kind of he throws him back by saying, remember, in my case, there were 2 elements. One was the contingency, as you put it, the contingency, and the other element was, strictly speaking, up and down. The up and down is valid. What made it invalid is the contingency. And I'm saying to you that no, the fact that it could go down balances the scale, and therefore my halacha is right. I mean, it's quite interesting, but I understand your point. There is a great deal of to understand in this. So that's how we're going to end this Gemara. And we see all different kinds of cases of ribbis where the subtlety of the case will determine whether or not there's ribbis or whether or not there's not ribbis. And this last case of Abaya really sort of gives us a view of that. Now, we have a little time. We're going to start a Mishnah and continue on the subject, but now we're going to switch around, and we're not going to look at ribbis the way we've been looking at it, where we buy or we get more money from the transaction. We're going to look at ribbis from the standpoint of what other gain can I get in a transaction that can change it from a valid transaction to a ribbis transaction. So let's just look at the Mishnah. We can start the Mishnah. Hamalva es chavero. I lend you money. And now lending money opens the possibility of ribis deraisa, right? Because if I lend you money and you give me back more, so now we're talking about what really looks like a Torah prohibited case. Hamalva es chavero. I lend you the money. What am I allowed to do and not allowed to do? Says the Mishnah, Lo yodir b'chatzero chinam. I lend you the money. You have a big house with a big courtyard, and I move into your courtyard and don't pay you any money. Now, okay, I don't pay you any money. So l'chayra, that may look like I'm getting an advantage from lending you the money because I'm using your chutzah. Okay, this is an open-ended comment, so we have to wait to discuss it. Second part of the Mishnah, v'lo yiskor mimenu b'pachos. Now let's say I don't want to just squat. I want to rent your dwelling. And I'm going to make a big simcha. You have a big hall, a big place. I want to rent it. Lo yisker mimenu b'pachos. He can't rent it from him for less than the going rate. Mipnei shuhu ribis. So this Mishnah is giving us two examples of ribis having nothing to do with the actual loan. I gave you a loan of $100. Fine, no problem. Now I'm making a big simcha, and I say, you know what? I'm looking for a hall for my simcha, and you have a big courtyard, right? Then I'm going to use the courtyard. Okay, I'm not going to pay you for it, and therein lies the question, which we'll get to in a minute. I'm not going to pay you for it, and says the Mishnah can't do it because somehow we're going to connect the loan to the free use of the chutzah. Second case, I'm going to use it and pay you, but I'm not going to pay you 100 zuz for the use of it. I'll pay you 50 zuz. Okay, you're still making money. The going rate is 100. You have now gotten ribis. Open-ended case. There's many nuances to this. So open-ended case. So you can't do it. Just look at this Gemara. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef bar Menai Omer Rav Nachman. Yosef says the name Rav Nachman. Afal pisha omru. Even though the rabbis, the Chazal, said, Hador b'chatzar chaver shalom midato. This is a different rule, nothing to do with our case. You have a chutzah, you have a big house. You go to Eretz Yisrael, no one's in the house, no one's in the chutzah. I see the opportunity to use your chutzah. Hador b'chatzar chaver shalom midato. The owner doesn't know that someone is there because he's off in Eretz Yisrael somewhere. Eina tzorech lahalos lo schar. Says that case says you don't have to give him schar if it's not being used and he doesn't even know it's being used. Different case, not our case. Now, rule number one, that an empty chutzner, Balabais doesn't know about it, don't have to give him any schar. Okay, fine. Independent of anything, that's the halach. Why? Because we say that the owner isn't losing anything. We have a famous chalal zenen of azalei choser, right? I am the beneficiary of using your dwelling, and you're not losing anything by my using it. Then zenen of azalei choser, and again, there's no hefsid. We're not saying that there's going to be any loss here. It's just that you're going to use my choser, and then you'll clean it up and leave, and I will never even know that it happened. That the halacha is you can do. However, hilva'u b'dor b'chatzero, that same klal rule that the Chazal made is if halva'u, if he lent him money, b'dor b'chatzero, and the owner of the and he's now using the chutzner of his friend, and that friend is still in Eretz Yisrael. He still doesn't know. He's not any more knowledgeable, except the fact that they have been involved in a loan transaction. Sorach lahalos loschar, then he has to pay the borrower, the lender has to pay, even though the lover, the borrower, has no loss. And again, he doesn't even know he's in Eretz Yisrael, right? Why? Because that looks like ribbis. So now let's stop a minute. The halacha is that zenenev choser is okay, right? Nobody is bad. Nobody. There's no problem. It all happens, and it's as if it never happened. That's okay, said the Chazal. It's zenenev choser. But if you attach that case to a case of a loan, it changes the entire case, and the case is no longer okay. It now becomes a chashash ribis because I am. In other words, you gave me the benefit of the all, even though you're not even there and don't know it. That's the chiddush. You're still in Eretz Yisrael. I never communicated with you. I'm going to use your hall. You could have told me yes. You could have told me no. But you don't even know. You're not there. And yet I use it. Then to the world, this looks like ribbis, and it's not permitted. Okay? That's that Gemara there. Okay. So let's just ask one question. My Kamash Malan. What is this chiddush that Rabbi Yosef bar Nachman is teaching us? Look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Hamalves Chavero, if someone lends money to his friend, Lo Yoder B'Chatzero Chinam, then he should not dwell in the Chatzar for free. V'lo Yisker Mimenu B'Pachos, and he shouldn't rent it for less than the market value, Mipnei Shehu Ribis, because it's Ribis. So this Mishnah says that. So what's Rabbi Yosef bar Nachman's, what's his chiddush? He's saying the same thing. I mean, here you have a Tana saying it, and he's an Amora, and he wants to give you some chiddush. And like we say many times, explain to me what you've just said and why what you said is a novel case. That's the Mishnah. That's exactly the Mishnah. So let's answer that question, and we'll stop. So the Gemara says as follows: if we only had our Mishnah, meaning not the other case, Hava Amina, I would have said Hanamile Bechotzer de Kaimala Agro, that I don't know better. So from our Mishnah, I'm going to say that the owner of this chotzer has put this chotzer up for rent. That the facts of this Mishnah are that this is a chotzer that anybody can rent. And since a person can rent it, if a gavra of the mager, and people hire this chotzer, let's say for a wedding, the big chotzer, they want to make a wedding, so it's normal to hire and pay for it. Therefore, we're saying that if the malveh uses the chotzer and doesn't pay for it, he's creating a loss for the owner of the chotzer, the lover, because he could otherwise have rented it to another person, right? We know that today there's probably 5 weddings every night for every hall. So he said, you're using the chotzer b'chinam. I could have rented it. I have a loss. I would have thought that's what the Mishnah is talking about, right? Aval chotzer the Lord kaima, but a chotzer that is empty and it's not for rent. I don't rent my chotzer out. I like my chotzer, and I'm going away, and I want it to be empty. V'gavra the ovid lemaker, and the lender is a person who has his own house. He has a home. He's not looking to find a place to live, right? It just happenstance that he wants to use it for a day, a night, whatever. A malo, I would say that this is really a case of zenenev is a loy chaser, and it should be permissible, right? In other words, you don't have to pay any rent because there's nothing happening here. Mamash Malon comes Rav Nachman, and he teaches that no, since Ribbis is such a serious event, even in a case where there's no Havamina, that he's going to use it or lose it, that the borrower will lose money on it, the potential appearance of Ribbis requires him to pay. So our Mishnah and that statement of the Rabbanan are not one and the same. Because from our Mishnah alone, I would think the only time that you're not allowed to do it is if it's a chutzner that is used by the owner, and therefore you're using it for free or for less than full value, shows Ribbis that you're getting a benefit from your loan. That's what I would have thought from the Mishnah. Comes Rav Nachman and says, no, even in a case where there is no loss whatsoever because he doesn't rent it out and he's away, doesn't even know it. Why would you think that that should not be okay? Rav Nachman says that's also not okay. You're not allowed to do it.
So if there was no,
the Mishnah and sorry, Jay?
If there was no loan involved and this neighbor just decided to use the vacant lot, there's no Ribbis, there's no discussion.
No, there was a loan. If there was
no loan, if a neighbor just
but there was no detriment to the borrower because he wouldn't have made money on it anyway. He doesn't rent it out. It's just for his use, and he's not here.
So there's no Ribbis.
In case of it's not Hefker, but of course, what's the loss? What's the loss? I don't rent this out. I don't rent my home out, and I'm not here to use it. So it's no havamina that I would be suffering any kind of a setback by your using
it. Ribbis. There's no.
He says there is ribbis. Why? Because anything that you do that is attached to a loan, you can't separate. That's Rav Nachman's chiddush. In other words, you can't separate. You and I have to not transact in order for me to benefit from you and you benefit to me. The fact that you and I are in a loan transaction changes our entire relationship.
Right.
We no longer are sort of simple and pure people. We now have to worry about again, you'll see machzik. It's not ribbis, it's machzik and ribbis, but still, ribbis applies in any case where there seems to be a benefit when you're in the middle of a transaction. Now, if you complete the transaction and the loan is over, and there's no deal, then this happens, that's okay, because there's no way to attach what you did to the loan. So this Mishnah is opening up a whole new venue for us to discuss when you make a loan and that loan becomes sort of a lightning rod to something else you're doing. Can you do it? So maybe we had to have a minute and we could do it. Says Rav Nachman, no. The Mishnah is talking about a case where the borrower would actually lose money. Of course you can't do it. But Nachman's talking about a case where the borrower was not losing money because he would never have rented out. He doesn't even know about it. Even so, once it somehow has an imprimatur of being attached to a loan, we have to make a clear line of demarcation and say you can't do it. So that
there's no loan. How is it attached to a loan? There is no loan.
No. We're saying that there is a loan. In other words, there is a loan. Once you engage in a loan, you have to be extra careful and not do things that if you didn't have the loan would be okay. In other words, if I use your chutzner, I use your hall, your wedding hall, or you have a big yard, and you don't even know it, then the halacha is you can do that. Now, once you and I are involved in a transaction, independent, we're involved in a transaction, doing that same thing appears to be ribbis. Because
so in other words, if two people have one person lends another one a loan,
right,
and then the other
And
one
then
was
winds up using property of his without
By
paying
it's
him.
like, by the way, I want to use your land. I want to use your yard.
Oh, you mean
It's
he
discussed,
asked if,
but if it's discussed when the loan happened,
oh, so now
that's a different thing.
okay, so now you're getting into things we'll talk about is the question of when it happens
Yeah.
and does that make a difference? That's a good separate question. But right now, prima facie, we're talking about a case where a person is, I mean, the cloud zen then that's midas stone. I mean, we have all kinds of halachas about how a person shouldn't do that. You should be open to letting somebody use a facility or something where you absolutely have no loss. Why would you be so? That's not the way we operate in our religion. So, but once you have a separate transaction, that doesn't become midas stone anymore.
As a relation.
That now becomes chashash ribis. That's why I'm saying the long arm of ribis now is going to take us into areas that you wouldn't even have thought. Why should this be ribis? This is really being gracious to my neighbor. And I should always be gracious to my neighbor. Says the Mishnah, and Nachman emphasizes that you have to be, once you're engaged in commerce, which we could, again, once you're engaged in commerce that is a loan, only a loan, then anything else you do is potentially suspect as ribis, and we will see, Mitzvah next week, how to make carve-outs, that there are carve-outs. But at least prima facie, we're saying from this Mishnah, it seems that there is a case of ribis every time you transact something on the back of a loan. In other words, you piggyback something on the back of a loan, and it becomes ribis. So, Michael, you've been silent. I guess you don't have a problem with this, but
I think
all right, Michael's still there. But okay, so in any event, we've opened up now the door to a whole different line of questioning, and Mitzvah Shem, next week we'll proceed further. But Jay, you're on the right track. You know, there's a whole.
Let me ask you a
whole
question.
Carve-outs now for whether it's okay or not.
Over the years, has anybody ever written a sefer totally about ribis and brought it down to some sets of rules that can be used?
Well, I mean, again, you have to look at the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, the Shulchan Aruch has a whole section on Hilchos Ribis, and I mean that's what we follow. Is that the halachas of Ribis comes from our halacha, not from. I mean, the discussion of the Gemara at the time led to all kinds of, as it does always, led to the establishment of halacha, and today, of course. They didn't have it at the time, although we created it, is that we circumvent ribis by casting it into a whole different arena of commerce, so that what we didn't have then takes it out of ribis. Ribis is still the hilchos ribis, but if you say this transaction is not ribis, and here's the reason why it's not ribis, then you don't fall prey to all of these issues. And under those circumstances, what the Mishnah is saying you can't do, you can do, because you carved out that your transaction was not a ribis-worthy transaction. Now you and I can just be plain good folks, and you can use my lawnmower, or you can use my yard, or whatever it happens to be. So
I tell you, a quick search shows there are quite a few books that have been written specifically about Hilchos Ribis.
Yeah. I mean, but the halacha is still the halacha. At the end of the day, whatever has been written, you have to still go back to the Shulchan Aruch. But the fact is, and we've seen this from the very beginning, that ribis is one of the most complicated mitzvahs, and because we don't want, and we've said this all the time, we don't want to chill commerce. We don't want to make people not lend money, not be in the arena. So therefore, they have to know this halachas well, and we find ways to say that it shouldn't be ribis. It's just someone this weekend was talking about, the Free Loan Society. Okay, he was talking about making loans without ribis, to people who have these needs, et cetera, et cetera. It was just a discussion the other day here. So again, that's why we have these institutions, is that we want to try to help people with monetary loans without transgressing the halacha. But yeah, okay. So Mitzvah next week we'll go further. And everyone have a wonderful week. And as we get closer to Rosh
Thank
Hashanah,
you.
next Sunday will be almost an Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we should all prepare ourselves.